Netflix's Korean series Squid Game has broken all the platform's records. As of October 2021, Netflix Squid Game has broken 111 million views, surpassing some of the most popular shows like Bridgerton and Money Heist. And while Squid Game is extremely entertaining to watch, what cultural contexts are lost in translation?
Talk Squid Game.
Let's talk Squid Game. I don't know why I said that so happily.
I think we can both agree that it's not our usual cup of tea when it comes to K-dramas, but it's such an international and cultural phenomenon that it's really hard to ignore. And it's one of those instances, actually more numerous than people realize, but an instance where East Asia and South Asia and its representations collide.
Yep. Again, as Sharon said, I did not want to watch the Squid Game. I watched it just because we are so committed to doing When East Meets South, and we wanted to talk about Squid Game. I rather stay with the K romance, historical fiction, genre. Squid Game is definitely not my cup of tea.
But we can't ignore it, right? It's become so global.
It is the number one Netflix show ever globally. Like I said, I'll say that again. It's the number one show on Netflix of all time.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's the number one show actually in India on Netflix, and it has been since its release. And in the US, New York Times has been writing up about it. Washington Post has been writing about it. Every single major news daily has been writing up about it. So it's a phenomenon. So,
we're talking Bridgerton numbers, which is huge.
Better than Bridgerton numbers.
Yeah, better than Bridgerton.
People to Bridgerton as the most watched Netflix show ever, which is saying something.
It really is. But it's interesting that it's become so global and so globalized. And like you said, so many different people and editorials are writing about it. The kind of the small voice that I see a little bit, but hasn't made its way, I think, to one of the bigger publications is the Korean perspective of its globalization. And kind of the loss of cultural context that as a non-Korean person watching Squid Game, you experience, or you don't even realize you experience it, but you do.
This is actually, and I have a specific question to get us started with this, but this is actually true when, as an Indian, I watch Indian movies with subtitles on, and you immediately see that, it's not a direct translation, or even when it's a direct translation, it kind of loses something. So you really don't get the cultural context for certain things. I mean, you can still enjoy the movie or still enjoy the show, but you don't really truly get the juicy bits of it in a way that you would know if you know the cultural context and the language. Mm-hmm. With that said, what is squid in the Squid Game?
It's a good question. So at the beginning of the series, they talk about a game that's played on children's playgrounds called Squid Game, and it involves, going from one spot to the other and pushing people out of certain spaces, and it's like a little roughhousey sort of game. But the interesting cultural nuance that at least I read from it is the word squid itself. So there's kind of like an interesting cultural connotative element to the word squid, ojingo in Korean. And when you use it to refer to a person, it's used as like a disparaging like not very good looking, not up to snuff, kind of gross, and may also be used to describe like the patheticness of someone's life or nature. It's not a nice term by any means. And some people use it to be funny with their friends, like you're so misshapen, that you look like a squid, or, you sometimes hear in
What's
drama,
the word? What's the word for squid in Korean?
ojino, ojino,
Ojuno?
ojino. You lose kind of that double entendre because it's, yes, it's the Squid Game, like the children's game, but the people who are playing are meant to be like not great people. That's
Mhm.
the idea of it. It's like they're in debt. They don't treat their family well. They don't treat other people well, which obviously not everyone is like that who are playing in those games, right? There's just some people who are down on their luck. Some of the characters whom we'll talk about, but you lose that nuance even just in the title,
Yeah.
in these
Yeah.
translations.
I didn't know this until you told me. So I thought it was fascinating to actually know that squid has these connotations associated with it. It's such a great title for the show. Actually, once you get to know what actually squid means culturally.
And you talked about subtitling, and that's been a big issue that some Korean cultural critics and writers have talked about with Squid Game in particular, that for some reason the subtitles seem to very much lack
Mhm.
sort of like nuanced translation.
Yeah.
There have been subtitles on Netflix that capture the vibe of what they're saying
Right.
much better, but for some reason Squid Games didn't do that.
Yeah, I wonder if it's also because they just sort of dumbing it down for an international audience. Like, it's just easier to do the lowest common denominator subtitling than because if you watch, not on Netflix, but if you watch Korean dramas on Viki Rakuten, they will give you the actual translation, and then they will in parentheses kind of tell you in Korean this means. And I really appreciate shows that have that sort of translate subtitling, because then I know the literally what is being communicated, but also what the context is. So
Yeah.
if you are an international movie show watcher, you know the troubles.
Yeah, and that actually points out an interesting kind of variance in subtitling. For Vicky Rakuten, it's a team of volunteers,
Yeah.
people who are invested in the drama, people who are invested maybe the actor or the webtoon that it's originally inspired from. And so they have almost like a sense of duty
Yeah.
in order to make it accessible to fellow fans.
Yeah, that explains it.
Like the grassroots subtitling is an area of fan studies that people have studied back when anime first became a thing in international entertainment. For Netflix, they hire somebody, and they give someone like X amount of dramas to watch and then subtitle. So it may just be, at the whims of whoever was hired to do it. And not to say that I'm a terrible expert at the language nuances, because I'm not fluent enough to be able to call out all the language nuances in Squid Game in particular. But there have been some Korean writers who have that. Actually, I think it would have been lost on me if I hadn't read their work. I think the most obvious nuance for me that was lost, and I can remember it kind of because I thought it was so strange, is that there are scenes where one of the female players, the really nasty one that like always gets up in everyone's business.
Minso? I think Mincio. I'm just thinking of something Min. I'm not sure the character's name is.
I forget her character's name, but she keeps referring to male players that she wants to ally with as oppa, right? Which anyone who's familiar with K dramas or K pop knows oppa is the term for elder brother from a younger female to an older male, and you use it both for your biological brother and your biological family, but you also use it for someone who is very close to you. So maybe someone you're dating, maybe a family friend. So her calling someone oppa creates a power dynamic where she is flattering them and giving them a position of power, being elder than her and having more power than her, right? She's attempting to garner that flattery. In the translation, though, that relationship, that oppa relationship is lost, and they translate oppa to babe, which kind of like just loses, like, yeah, you're trying to endear yourself to that guy, but it doesn't have the same hierarchical power structures associated with it.
언니 오빠들 말씀 중에 sorry. 이 오빠 잘생겼네.
The oppa thing actually cracks me up, because where I am from in India, we do the same thing, or we used to do the same thing. I don't think it's true anymore, but cheta, the word for elder brother, is also the word that, people refer to for elder, sort of male, kind of elder to you, but you have, like, it can be a cousin, but it can also be a husband. It can be like, the vendor that you buy groceries from, but like, that word is transferable. And so this, like, I had a moment where I realized, oh, it's not just my people who do this thing. There are other people who actually use words for husband, boyfriend, brother, all in one. And I was like, yes, in good company.
Yeah, but like if you were to see a depiction of that on screen and the translation was babe, it like really loses the interconnectivity.
Exactly. Yeah. And also, I think this is also something, like, I've since realized that Korean culture has designated terms for younger brother, elder sister, a man you might see on the street but is not related to, but you want to refer to them with some respect. And so all those things in Korean, when subtitling happens, are sort of lost almost. And so basically that kind of lost in translation process, quite literally, is a huge part, I think. I mean, you understand it's like you understand the show and what's going on, but you lose the cultural context within which that show is produced.
Yes.
And so you lose an insight into the culture that you are interacting with, even if it's through like a performative media.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So it'd be interesting. I think this is the time in order to give people the full context for Korean producers and production companies, I think, to really push that like soft power agenda that they have, right? It's like as seen on Squid Game, or to give context for Squid Game, which they're doing a fair bit of. Squid Game was just awarded a national award for the spreading of Korean culture internationally, which is interesting because I wonder what parts of Korean culture people actually picked up from the show. But I think the other kind of loss of cultural context really comes to play when we talk about like intercultural interactions that happen in the show too. We've talked in a previous episode about how Korea is relatively like mono-ethnic. It's starting to change quite a bit now, and relatively homogenous culturally, with infusions of Japanese and Chinese cultures. But you watch K-dramas for the most part, and it's like Korean people, which makes sense, or people who Korean pass, right? Like Henry Lau from Super Junior, who's Chinese Canadian, being in a K-drama, but like speaking Korean, so he reads as Korean, right?
Long time no see. Yo, I missed you. 아, 준성이 형한테 들었는데 이제 안 아픈 거지? You feel good, right? 신이 내 말을 들어줬나 봐. Thank you, God. Thank you, God, for helping my 영호 형님.
But when you see international actors start showing up in these K-dramas, it like breaks the veneer of this monoculturalism, but doesn't give any sort of context as to how that comes to be. So like often in like the mid 2000s, early 20 teens dramas, you'll see the random American person that just gets like dropped in,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, it's my friend. And he like suddenly speaks Korean or something like that. There is like a little bit of that, I think, when it comes to the character of Ali in Squid Game, but there's actually a very profound backstory to his representation, or the representation of South Asians in a drama like Squid Game, right?
Yeah, no. So here's where, like, when we talk about broadly about Asian popular culture and like the differences in them, I think this kind of representational, like South Asia, or just because I'm from India, I'm going to use India as an example. India is multicultural in the way it is because each state speaks a different language, almost always has a different language in addition to Hindi. If you come down to South India, like, most of us don't speak in Hindi in South India. So the kind of translation processes and contextualization of cultures is kind of built in because already the country is multicultural. So we in South Asian movies, you have the same problems, but everybody's already aware of the loss in translation problem and the loss of cultural context problems. And in fact, the other day I was thinking, I was like trying to sing K-pop songs, and it was like when I was really young and I did not know Hindi. I was learning Hindi in school, but Hindi is not my first language. I would try to learn Hindi songs without really knowing the meaning of the words. And so basically it's almost like in my head, it's a very familiar way of learning another culture's context or language. And so that multiculturality is different. What actually fascinated me about Ali's appearance in Squid Game is that the one thing that, he's seen as this person, he has a disability, he's lost his fingers, but he's seen as like this sort of like migrant laborer worker who is trying to support his family, so that like a really sympathetic character, and then like the sort of like the evil woman character, she's like, oh, you're not here on a visa, are you? Like, you're not. And every time a South Asian gets depicted, you see this sort of disparity of depiction. In the US movies, South Asians are usually doctors or engineers or like, people who have white collar jobs. And it's like a model minority myth that's sort of perpetuated in movies like Never Have I Ever, or shows like Never Have I Ever. There's a huge South Asian community that's out there talking about how it's very upper caste, Hindu, upper class, sort of like, depictions of what it is to be a South Asian in the US.
Grab your textbooks, we need to go. Devi, that textbook has been blessed. If it touches the ground, I have to take it back to the priest. I don't have the time to go to Rancho Cucamonga today.
It's fine. I caught it.
And then you see Ali in Squid Game on the opposite end of the spectrum. And it also kind of shows you what status different cultures or people from different cultures have within the host culture. And so I find it like a fascinating depiction. Now, Ali himself, I looked this up, Anupam Tripathi, who's the actor, he's Indian, who went to school in Korea, went to study drama in Korea, and who has learned the language. I mean, obviously I don't know Korean, so I wouldn't know how proficient he is, but I'm guessing he is fairly proficient, that, he seems to be not dubbed. And he has continued to stay in Korea and act in movies. And I'm very, very familiar with Indian Americans in the US, sort of acting in American movie shows, or like somebody like Priyanka Chopra, who's Indian, and who's moved to the US to act in, but she's a rare case of, an Indian Bollywood star sort of making the break. But in my mind, I hadn't even realized until I saw Ali that there are Indian actors in like, other non-Hollywood acting cultures, which was also fascinating, generally. But I also want to talk about migrant labor and the importance of the significance of it being depicted in Squid Game. I've been doing a lot of reading about migrant labor in South Korea, and because South Korea's young people don't want to work these agrarian jobs, like sort of these less paid jobs, just like we have the same problem in the US. There's a need for migrant laborers, and the migrant labor was being they were coming from Philippines or Cambodia and some of the other sort of neighboring in the vicinity countries. But now there's a lot of people coming in from India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and other South Asian countries as well. And so it's fascinating to see that representation is not very different from the way South Korea is trying to grapple with its need for hard labor jobs. It's immigration policies which are behind the times, and the fact that it's a monocultural society. And so it's fascinating to see that all represented in Ali's character in Squid Game.
Mm-hmm.
다 살았습니까? 걱정했습니다. 늙은 사장님 괜찮습니까?
괜찮아. 에? 이 친구가 좀 무슨 일이 벌어질지 몰라. 거기서 일 생기면 이쪽으로 와요.
알겠습니다.
So, some things that for me come to mind are there's a video series of another production company called Asian Boss, and they really do explore these stories of non-Koreans or non-Japanese or non-Chinese moving to these countries in order to try to do what Ali did, and garnering more awareness for something like this happening. But it's really interesting to see it represented in a very now globally popular show that gives a little bit of context to it, but not really like as much context, just enough basically to survive through the show and to feel something for Ali. I think maybe the representation of South Asian immigrants in Korean media is at the same level or a very comparable level to what it was in the United States maybe 20 or 30 years ago, because it wasn't always that way that South Asians were depicted as being white collar.
Good point, yeah.
Same with East Asians, that it wasn't always that way, that it was the like, P.S. I love you, living in upper middle class suburban neighborhood. You had a lot of the really overtly stereotypical and often borderline racist depictions of South and East Asians working these stereotypical jobs, the taxi driver.
Yes, I was going to say the taxi driver.
Yeah, the dry cleaner, the convenience store owner. Some are embracing that stereotype, right, and reclaiming it and really telling the stories of those stereotypes. And some have shown kind of an evolution of what immigrants can look like in the United States in particular, talking about the white collar workers and the importance of education. But yeah, Korea seems to still be in that like stereotypical grappling with the immigrant identity there.
And I think that's only natural because they've just begun to, even the government, I was reading up about this, and so correct me if I'm wrong, but like, so one of the problems, like, Ali is from Pakistan and in Squid Game, and apparently, like, so if you're from Pakistan, Bangladesh, I think even Afghanistan, Nepal, some of these South Asian countries, you can actually get like, a work visa. But India does not have a work visa relationship with South Korea. And so Indian workers, if they are in in South Korea, they are illegal because they don't have a work visa status or like, that relationship. And I read up about this a couple of days back, and I find that fascinating that, you can have those immigration policies based on country to country in a way where it causes more confusion, right? Like, how do you then get people to, I was reading the story of a migrant worker from India who has been in Korea now for like 10 years. He went there because he was promised this job. And then he realized once he got there that, if you're qualified, if you're educated or not, you end up doing agrarian labor. And because he needed the money for his family, he just decided to stay, but he hasn't been able to come back to India for 10 years.
Because he would risk.
Yeah, because, he can't go back because there's no visa permits that will allow him to travel back and forth. So his parents have died while he was away, his kids have grown up, and he's continued to work in South Korea for the last 10 years. And so it's fascinating to see how even the government of Korea hasn't still sort of worked through the immigration policies that they require by need, because, they need labor force that will take up these jobs. And it has some parallels to the conversations that we have in the US about like, sort of blue collar labor force in the US as well.
That's really interesting because in Squid Game, Ali is supposed to be from Pakistan.
Yeah.
So he could actually have a legal visa. So the icky woman, again, forgetting her character's name, when she accuses him of not having a visa, it's very much likened to accusing someone that in the US, and like an immigrant that's working an agrarian job or a blue collar job, it's like accusing them of being an illegal immigrant just because of the job they're doing or the way that they look. But now knowing, I didn't know this, now knowing that there's actually a potential for some South Asian countries to have that work visa exchange with Korea, that comment now means so much more of like, I'm judging you by the way you look, not necessarily my knowledge of where you come from.
Which is, again, the lost in translation process, because there's so much, like in just one interaction, you have so much of these sort of encoded messages, which is so interesting.
Very loaded. So then that kind of brings up an interesting conversation about South Asian folks in the entertainment industry in Korea, because the character of Ali, citizenship-wise, is supposed to be Pakistani, but the actor, citizenship-wise, is Indian, right?
Yeah, he's from New Delhi, yeah.
Okay, and then you have, so there's a few K-pop stars, especially in the group Z-Stars, Z-Boys and Z-Girls, who are a Pan-Asian K-pop group, or they call themselves Z-Pop, because they don't have any Koreans in the group. And there's a couple of Indian idols in both the Z-Boys and the Z-Girls. So they're working in Korea, they're doing acting jobs, they're doing idol industry jobs. I wonder how they're able to get a visa, or if there's some sort of special exception for entertainment because Korean soft power is such a big industry.
That's interesting. I think the visa is maybe for like agrarian labor.
Okay.
So there might be different visa statuses that I don't know about.
Yeah.
But I think the agrarian labor work permits are probably different.
Yeah. That makes it even more interesting because they assign value to immigrants coming from abroad working in entertainment industries and continuing this veneer of like a sparkly K-pop industry, right? But not necessarily where the labor is needed.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Very interesting dynamic.
Also, we might just be like, mouthing off because we haven't done enough research on visa regulations of South Korea. So
this is not a sanctioned advice of how you're supposed to get a visa to Korea.
Don't take our advice on it.
So I think a lot of people, when they watch Squid Game, they're like, this is just a really entertaining show. And it is. It's an entertaining show, gives off Hunger Game vibes, tells you stories of people's lives. But there really is an opportunity here to talk a lot more about the cultural context of Squid Game and the world in which it exists, because that world includes a lot of geopolitical and interpersonal relationships that exists in real life in Korea.